Afternoon all. I started my Twitter account around 2 months ago. On the day I started, my first question was to Elon Musk asking why he was banning things, even if they were unconscionable, when he claimed to be a free speech absolutist. Within an hour of having opened my account, I was given an hour timeout, with no reason given. This seemed strange. Asking a question, especially a seemingly trivial and inane one, was beyond the pale. This piqued my interest in what free speech is. I always like to start with the dictionary definition before proceeding. So, as with anything, there is little of substance in this definition, but it is helpful in having something to break down. A right to express opinions. This is straightforward. If I have an opinion, then I have a right to express that opinion. It does not mention any of the buzzwords of the day, such as misinformation or disinformation. Here, for me, is the get out clause. Publicly, as I have heard in the discourse, you have the right to speak freely, but no one has the right to platform you. Or yes, we believe in freedom of speech but not freedom of reach. This raises more questions. What does publicly mean in this context? What is platforming? What is freedom of reach? This is where the U.S. Constitution comes in handy because it is one of the few documents that outline an extensive definition of what free speech should be. There are a lot of words referring to Congress and government, which suggests that a person only has free speech in relation to the powers given to them by their rulers. This is not particularly helpful either, as my view is that a person has a right to speak their mind, even in the absence of government. What it does do is provide a basis for how the individual should act within a group of other people, which I think is fair, but referring to the last line and to petition the government for a redress of grievance does not inspire confidence. Why should it be up to the rulers to be the arbiters of what is or is not free speech? In that vein, let's define the words individually. Free, not limited or controlled. Speech, the ability to talk. Therefore, free speech become the ability to talk whilst not being limited or controlled. No government, no arbitration, no interference from other people. Anarchy. A person should be able to say whatever they like. If this is the case, then why was I given a timeout? I asked a question and freely expressed my ability to talk, yet was censored for doing so. Is this free speech? This is where the rubber meets the road when it comes to free speech versus censorship. Yes, all people within a society have a right to say whatever they like, but a major question is raised. Does a society have a responsibility to protect others from the things that some people say? Does a marketplace have a responsibility to reject people that say things others might consider offensive? When he was buying Twitter, Elon is reported to have said this. He said he plans to err on the side of leaving content up, no matter how controversial. Yet, doubtless, mine is not the only account to have been banned for something innocuous, and only taking down content that clearly violates the law, such as an incitement to violence. As outlined earlier, free speech is about being allowed to say anything without limit or control. That means that even in the face of the law, you should still be allowed to state your opinions. You cannot put limitations on things and still claim to be a free speech absolutist. An interesting notion made in this report from Vox was the concept of hate speech. This has become a very real club to beat people with. Indeed, in Twitter's own rules, it is still included as a section and is clearly still enforced by their support staff. Despite claiming to be a free speech absolutist, in an interview with the BBC, Musk himself says there are limits to speech. In this case, if you are deferring to a higher power, then, by definition, you cannot be that thing. If there are limits on speech, then it is not free, and you are not an absolutist.
It has to be a line in terms of hate speech. I mean, you're not looking at total 100% unrestricted speech.
I generally am of the opinion that if the people of a given country are against a certain type of speech, they should talk to their elected representatives and pass a law to prevent it. So, for example, you cannot advocate murdering someone. That's illegal in the United States, everywhere really, I suspect. So there are limits to speech.
I mean, I guess taking your argument to a logical conclusion then, do you accept that there's more misinformation on the platform if it's not being policed in the same way?
I actually think there's less these days because we've eliminated so many of the bots which were pushing scams and spam. And previous management turned a blind eye to the bots because their bonuses were tied to user growth. And if your compensation is tied to user growth, well, you're not going to look too closely at some of the users. That's part of the problem. So I think we've got less misinformation because we don't have the bot problem that we used to do. And we also have given a lot of attention to community notes, which corrects, with community itself, corrects misinformation. It's been very effective.
I mean,
Yeah.
I would only just add that, we have spoken to people who have been sacked that used to be in content moderation, and we've spoken to people very recently who were involved in moderation, and they just say there's not enough people to police this stuff, particularly around hate speech in the company. Is that
What
something
hate
that you want
speech are
to
you talking
address?
about? I mean, you use Twitter.
Right.
Do you see a rise in hate speech?
I mean,
But just a personal anecdote, like what do you? I don't.
personally, for you, I would see I get more of that kind of content, yeah, personally. But I'm not going to talk to the rest of for the rest of Twitter.
You
But
see more
personally,
hate speech personally.
I would say I would see more hateful content in that.
Content you don't like or hateful? What do you mean to describe a hateful thing?
Yeah, I mean, just content that will solicit a reaction, something that may include something that is slightly racist or slightly sexist, those kinds of things.
So you think if something is slightly sexist, it should be banned?
No,
Is that what you're saying?
I'm not saying anything. I'm
Well,
saying.
I'm just curious. I'm trying to understand what you mean by hateful content, and I'm asking for specific examples. And you just said that if something is slightly sexist, that's hateful content. Does that mean that it should be banned?
Well, you've asked me whether my feed, whether it's got less or more. I'd say it's got slightly more.
That's why I'm asking for examples.
Right.
Can you name one example?
I honestly don't use. Honestly, I
You
don't.
can't name a single example.
I'll tell you why. Because I don't actually use that for you feed anymore. Because I just don't particularly like it.
But you
And
said
actually,
you-
a lot of people are quite similar. I only
Well,
look at
hang
my
on a second.
following.
You said you've
my
seen
following.
more hateful content, but you can't name a single example, not even one.
I'm not sure I've used that feed for the last 3 or 4 weeks. And
Well, then how did you see that hateful content?
Because I've been using Twitter since you've taken it over for the last 6 months.
Okay, so then you must have at some point seen for you hateful content. I'm asking for one example.
Right.
You can't give a single one.
And I'm saying
Then I say, sir, that you don't know what you're talking about.
really.
Yes, because you can't give me a single example of hateful content, not even one tweet, and yet you claimed that the hateful content was high.
Well,
That's a
This leads onto a separate argument about where the line should be drawn. For Musk, it seems to be any unlawful material should be removed. For his new CEO, Linda Yaccarino, she has drawn the line at wanting to delete content that is still lawful but awful. More than any censorship should be about freedom of reach, not speech. Furthermore, if you do post awful material, then Twitter plans to subject you to shame. Freedom of reach seems to refer to while you have the right to say anything you like. A platform has a corresponding right whether or not to allow that message to be broadcast on their platform, which is not an unreasonable position. A description of this that I liked was from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, link in the description. Connor says what that translates to is arbitrary, opaque, capricious persecution of things they don't like under the guise of repressive tolerance. So you will never know if you are being suppressed, you can only infer it, and you'll never know quite why. He further goes on to explain Twitter's plans for a transparency database of content moderation decisions. This will affect most social media platforms, where they have to publish the reason for a ban and are fined for not doing so. Connor points out it is useful as feedback, but social media groups are unlikely to be truthful and use vague terms such as hate or misinformation, given how you need a verified ID for a blue check mark. This will be the equivalent of public shaming or the use of social credit scores where you are shunned from society for having the wrong views. On a personal note, I happen to agree with Musk's approach that if something is unlawful, then that should be removed. The reasoning being that laws are created by elected representatives that are allowed to make decisions on behalf of the populace. However, this opens a can of worms in terms of what happens with repressive regimes that consider dissent against the authority as being hate speech or misinformation, yet have enacted the relevant law. This is seen on Twitter having modified their user interface to allow an option to report a tweet as hate speech within the European Union. This is an example of hard cases making bad law. The European Union found they could not really punish Twitter or Elon Musk directly, so they are looking to punish their population through the use of law. This is tyrannical behavior under the guise of protecting people from mean words. The sad truth is that people will accept tyranny masked as safety before they will accept freedom. This is because freedom is hard. The only person you have to blame for bad choices is yourself, and most people are cowards. I include myself in that. In relation to my own involvement with Twitter in my second time out, I spent a day posting and feeding my dopamine addiction. Most of my takes are poor attempts at trolling or trying hard, and failing to be funny. In one of my replies, I agreed with a post that Putin was a dictator. But how is this any different to most of the politicians in the West? Another was to a post asking who they were, to which I replied saying that Kanye knows who they are, neither being particular contentious. However, the tweet that got me in trouble was in reference to Kim Kardashian. I cannot post this because I deleted said content. I said something like, "She is a hoe. She behaves like a hoe. She started her career living off her daddy's money." When I next log into Twitter, I am told that I violated their hate speech policy. Now, I did not say she was a hoe because she is a woman. I did not say it because of her ethnicity. I said it because of her behavior and because that is the perception of her. So this was my perception of that perception. In my view, there was no hate speech or intent of it being a personal attack. However, what is a personal attack was this tweet. This is hateful speech. This is incitement to violence or harm. I cannot say whether or not this person has been banned because Twitter has yet to publish their scarlet letters. Do you think they will have banned their account? It is speculation, but given the modern climate, given this person seems to be a person of color and is attacking the demon of the day, white people, I doubt it. Dr. Shola is known for her race-baiting tweets and personal attacks on people for the crime of being white. How many bans has she had? This goes to the podcast of the Lotus Eater's comments about how everything on social media is done through a lens of vagueness. It is only through coherent and clear free speech that we can establish where the boundaries are. I have some sympathy with social media platforms because they face a major backlash if they allow people who do not follow the orthodoxy, and it is not as though any government is going to aid them despite what the U.S. First Amendment says. Most of these governments are ideologically captured as well, so it makes sense to bend the knee to tyranny. However, it is clear they are very well compensated for this enabling. In conclusion, this video is part rant, part an attempt to understand the peculiarities of the social media rules. They seem to be deliberately written vaguely enough for platforms to apply arbitrarily. This is frustrating because they are essentially built on sand, where 1 minute a comment is hate speech and at another time it is not. This makes for an uncertain user interaction. Anyway, what do you think? Thanks to all of those who watched. If you could give an upvote if you thought what I said made sense, a downvote if you think this was a complete waste of time. Add any comments regarding any aspect of the topic or my presentation skills, preferably something constructive, either positive or negative.